Next thing we want to talk about is an inspection. So the inspection is fairly flexible, and we're going to talk about an inspection group, then a specific inspection plan. We're going to talk about this automatic item tracking status modification, and then different ways or different areas that you can actually perform an inspection in the system. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to look at an inspection plan itself. So I can set up many different types of inspection plans. Let's look at this, this one right here. So I'm going to have a number. I do have version control on inspection plans. So the key here is, if you remember how version controls, or if you're familiar with how version controls work with, let's say, a routing or a bill of materials, similar idea here, so that I'm able to really track the evolution of a specific inspection plan. If I start by tracking two things, but then I want to add a third, again, I wouldn't just change it without an audit trail. I'm going to have a potentially a version change then on a particular inspection plan. I can create inspection plans then on different things in the system. So item would be pretty typical, right? This would be an inventory item. I can also inspect equipment. So an equipment inspection may be a particular piece of equipment in my manufacturing process. I want to review that on some regular basis. An object would allow me to basically create a user-defined object. So there's some overlap conceptually between equipment and an object, but that would be it. I can set it on a base item. So a base item is looking more at the ProBatch manufacturing components. The concept of a base item would allow me to have different, let's say, filling container sizes, and they would tie back to a base item. So more of a tracking component, but I could tie an inspection plan to that base item. I can do a QA inspection group. So that would just be a group of things that I would want to perform an inspection on, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then again, the equipment group, so very similar to that. Start and end date. Business relationship. So the inspection QA item group then ties to this business relationship. So I can set up a particular inspection plan that's filtered maybe for a specific vendor or customer. So instead of looking at an item, I could look at all items for a particular vendor, or on an inbound transaction or outbound transactions for customer shipments. I also can do a QA vendor group or customer group. So very much of a matrix concept where I've got items, item groups, vendors, customers that I can then determine at what point is a particular inspection plan valid. We do carry the responsibility center forward. So if you're familiar with the responsibility center in the base Business Central product, that does carry into the inspection plan for categorization. In terms of the item inspection level, so depending on what type of feature am I looking at, I can track that then to the item itself, which would be the master item, a lot or a serial level. I think most typically when you're performing those inspection plans, they're tied to a lot number or serial number, but you certainly could tie it to a specific item if you wanted to as well. That's more related to that base functionality that we looked at before. And then, as I said, we can do different versions, so there's a status associated with the version. All right, once I have an inspection plan, typically what I'm going to have is an inspection group. Okay, and I'm actually going to pull up a different one to look at this inspection group so that we can see. Yeah, here we go. So this inspection plan is going to look at tomato juice, and I actually have I have two different inspection groups assigned to this particular item. And what I'm doing is, on an inspection group, I'm determining at what point do I perform that inspection. So what you'll notice is, at a production order level, I want to validate or verify, check the sodium level. But on a purchase receipt, I want to look at the sodium level, and then I also want to check the incoming temperature. Maybe I want to validate that it didn't get too warm or too cold. So when it hits my dock, I want to know what the temperature was. So you can see that an inspection plan, the application of that plan can apply to in a matrix form. I also have the ability to set up multiple inspection groups associated with a plan. Okay, so let's look at an inspection group. All right, so this is my incoming inspection, or I'm sorry, this is my production order inspection level. These are the different places that then we could perform a group of inspections. And an inspection group just has multiple features that I'm looking at inside of the inspection group. So add a purchase receipt, purchase order, return, incoming, outbound documents, production orders, just a manual inventory inspection, etc. You can see that we can perform a specific set of inspections. I do have different data card entry points. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about this, but there is a new, this card 5518106 is a data entry page that can then appear on these existing documents. So in this case, a production order. As I post production during the production process, I'm going to get this particular data entry window to show up. I could have other ones if I wanted to. So if you wanted to do some modifications around that, et cetera, you can set that up. I've got ways to classify my inspection. This inspection location tells me where in my facility am I performing the inspection, and it potentially could be an outside service. So maybe I'm sending maybe I'm doing a calorie count or something like that, where I actually want to take a sample of the product, send it to an outside laboratory. I can track then the location of that inspection. Then the inspection group just allows me to pick which features, we already looked at that, do I want to perform an inspection against, okay? And then I can say what location those go to. So features end up tied to an inspection. The inspection group then gets tied to an inspection plan, okay? Then on that inspection group, what you'll notice is I have the ability then to determine if I want to and where do I want to track this. I can validate some upper level and lower level targets if I want to, that sort of thing. So we can also deal with samples here. If I want to take a fixed quantity per package, I can configure samples against a particular inspection feature within my inspection plan. Okay, so this sort of gets detailed down. All right, what happens then is when I have a transaction, I have an inspection order that gets created. And what I want to do is I want to look at this particular inspection order. So an inspection order can automatically be created based on where in the process I wanted to capture feature information or perform a particular inspection. So what I did on this one is when I had, I think it's a receiving information. So what happens is this released inspection order is created at the time of receiving. And what it's going to do is it's going to prompt then for data to be entered. And what you'll notice is that the inspection source record was receiving line, actually receiving order 13 line 10,000. So it's the first line in my warehouse receipt transaction. It's an inspection created at the lot level. So what we're going to see then is my lot will also be populated here. If I had multiple lots that were received, I would have multiple inspection orders that have been created if I'm capturing the data at a lot level. Does that make sense? So, depending on how my inspection plan has been created, I'm going to get multiple inspection orders that are going to be created. I don't need to go directly to this inspection order window. I also want to just point this out, that on the warehouse receipt, for example, I showed you that data entry line before. I have the ability actually to either create the inspection order if it's a manual creation. As I said before, we can automatically create inspection orders based on rules. So if I said every time at a warehouse receipt I want one created, it'll automatically create it, which I think is probably more typical. This actual value recording then would allow me to look at the inspection plan, the inspection group that is on this particular transaction and populate it here. I can limit, though, the ability for particular users to enter this quality data. So if I want somebody in receiving to do the measurements, I would have this actual value recording window available, and the receiving person could actually enter the actual value then of here's the actual value right here, actual value of the measurements. In the case where maybe I want those samples collected and then maybe I've got a specific laboratory that's going to do those measurements, in that case, those users in the laboratory would navigate to this released inspection order, and then they would pull up the inspection order from this point. They wouldn't go back to the receiving document and enter the data, if that makes sense. So depending on where you're going to do these measurements, how you want to control the inspection order. We can control access then to entering that data. Okay, so actual value recording on the transaction or the creation of an inspection order to be followed. I should point out that just like in the concept or the design of production orders, where you have I can create production orders, I have maybe planned production orders, and then I've got release production orders. We have a similar concept with inspection orders. So I could manually create inspection orders as well. So maybe I have a whole series of receipts, and if your process is go find those transactions and create the inspection orders, we can facilitate that side of or that way of working, or we can automatically create those. They could be created as a planned or as a released production order. So again, if you wanted more control over when that inspection order is available for update, we've got some flexibility around that. But again, your key here is I set up features, I tie features to that item, customer, vendor matrix type thing. When do I want to capture these features during the process? At what level do I want to capture the features? Then I create the inspection orders, assign those inspection orders to the particular points in the process again that I'd want to flag those. Okay, so that's sort of the inspection order at a high level. Okay. All right, so the inspection plan, we talked about that. The automatic item tracking modification. So that's where I said if a particular lot, let's say, is outside of tolerance, I could move it into QA. I can also say that an incoming lot is in a QA state until such time that it passes an inspection. So if I run an inspection order, the value or the measure is within tolerances, that could also then change the status or the disposition of the lot to say it's now valid, or it's a release state, so it's available for production, for sales, et cetera. Okay, so the automatic tracking could put something into a state that would quarantine it or take it out of a state based on the inspection plan being performed or the value or the outcome of that inspection plan. And then we talked about the performing inspection plans that could happen at the time of the transaction that initiated the inspection order, or you could segregate those out and have other people perform those.